final speaker is Mihir Sharma, who is widely regarded as one of the cleverest young writers in India. A Harvard-trained economist, Mihir has written for the Indian Express, Business Standard, and currently Bloomberg View. His recent book, Restart, was shortlisted for the FT and McKinsey Book of the Year. I've been reading this book, by the way, in preparation for today, and I can tell you it's one mother of a book. So if you want a damn good read, get Restart. So to tell us more about Brexit, Rexit, and let's give a very warm welcome to Mihir Sharma.
Well, thank you. So I landed in London on referendum day, purely by chance. I didn't think about it like that, and but I love elections and I love anything where people vote. So I decided to take a little bit of a walk around central London and Islington, and just to see what was going on. And eventually, my walk took me, as dusk came, to by then deserted Smithfield Market. And if you walk through the centre of Smithfield Market, they have, like everywhere else in this delightful historical theme park of a country, put up little signs telling you what the history of Smithfield Market was. And as I'm sure most of you know, it's sort of a meat wholesale market. And so there are all these pictures of it, in the 19th century, and then Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, sort of visiting it during the war, etc., etc. And at some point, there is this picture in 1972, and where you see all these sort of giant carcasses out there, and proud looking men in white coats. And below that it says, Smithfield Market saw its sort of greatest days in the early 70s, when the system of Commonwealth preferences continued, and health regulations were a little lax. Then, of course, Britain went into the common market and everything changed forever. Now, clearly what will have to change actually is Smithfield Market's little historical exhibition. But the reason that I brought this up was we forget 40 years on exactly how integrated Britain and the Commonwealth used to be before Britain went into the common market. And let me assure you that actually if you speak to a lot of Indians of that generation, Indians in Britain, British Indians, they remember it, and they remember it with a little bit of, let's say, nostalgia. My generation doesn't see much to this, but the generation above mine remembers when it was easier for Indians to travel to the United Kingdom, remembers when it was when their economies seemed to be a lot closer together than they are now. So yes, on this one, and this has been the subject of my last column, which has got me, enormous amounts of abuse on Facebook. It is entirely possible that if you're looking around for a group or of people or a relationship for which this Friday was good news, then India is Indians with an interest in Britain, and British people with an interest in India is that group, and the Indo-British relationship is that relationship. So do keep that in mind. To move on, however, the question that we have to then ask is, in what way can things change? Because in some ways, the relationship is already maxed out. Now, here's something interesting. The amount of investment in Britain from India is larger than the amount of investment from India in the rest of the European Union combined. So, if you're going to make the argument that you want to see more more Indian investment, of which there is a lot going around the world, into Britain, that's going to be a little difficult to achieve. In some ways, it's already maxed out. What hasn't done so well is our trading relationship, and there, yes, as both speakers have mentioned, the European Union's the cumbersome nature of the European Union and the even more cumbersome nature of the Indian Union make it somewhat difficult to come to some kind of agreement. However, I would be a trifle more optimistic than James about this, and I'll tell you why. It's because a lot of the objections that were being raised by the European side in the progress towards an Indo-EU FTA are things the UK doesn't really care about. They were, well, or doesn't care about as much as its former European partners. For example, data security was one giant issue. The Indian side wanted progress on India being declared a more data secure country than it is. And that sort of genteel lie is something that the British would be much more willing to indulge in than the Germans. Then another example would be that Indian car companies were deeply concerned about competition from German and Czech car makers of quality, and they were successfully blocking progress there. Tata Motors, which leads the Society of Indian Automotive Manufacturers, is much less concerned about competition from Jaguar Land Rover than I would think most other companies would be. So in many ways, the blocking of these particular things is likely to go down. And when that's put together with Prime Minister Modi's sheer enjoyment in front of a camera or signing things, and the blatant desperation, no doubt, of the next British Prime Minister to demonstrate that something good has come out of the referendum, I fully expect that in the next few months we will see, if not, at least an announcement of a date. Whether that date will be stuck to in terms of reaching agreement, I do not know, but I expect an announcement and, very, very positive headlines. We get a lot of positive headlines out of India. The question is, how many of those headlines come close to reality? And for that matter, even if we were to tomorrow sign a very, very favorable free trade agreement, something that is favorable to both India and Britain, would the Indian economy, supercharge itself as a result? Would we be able to take advantage of it? And there, I'm afraid that I'm going to be far less sanguine. There's a reason why Mr. Modi has been something of a disappointment. And that is, if you compare the Mr. Modi that not me, but, because I actually read his speeches, but most people expected in May 2014 with the person whom we have now had as Prime Minister for the past 2 years, there's a vast difference. Before May 2014, we got the impression that we were electing Margaret Thatcher. There's someone who'd come in and, turn her nose up at all these sort of, these enormous regulations that we've been piling up since 1850 and produce, a large pair of scissors and start cutting through red tape. Mr. Modi, it turns out, is not that man. And he's not that man for a very good reason. He's a much more Asian kind of reformer. He is a Mahathir Mohamad, for want of a better analogy. Mahathir Mohamad, of course, is the man who changed Malaysia, but he did this in a very, very specific way. He built infrastructure. He ensured that it was a very rigid and controlled state. He ensured that there was a system of preferences for the local born that kept his voters happy. He cut down on what was, in many ways, a far more plural culture in Malaysia. And he created a country that grew quite fast while its infrastructure is growing, but hasn't in some ways lived up to its potential of becoming, the center of Southeast Asia, of becoming the center of innovation, that, and in many ways today is caught in a middle-income trap of corruption, of combative politics, and of a lack of innovation. I think that's the best that we can expect from Mr. Modi, and I'll tell you why. It's because he doesn't believe in any of the things that we thought he would believe in. He doesn't believe in privatization. He doesn't believe in deregulation. He doesn't believe that it is essential in free trade. He doesn't believe that these are the things that are essential in order to unleash a country that has for many years been extremely short of innovation, entrepreneurship, and connections to the global economy. And I'll just give you, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples of how we know that this is the case. One of the most worrying headlines of the past year was, I think about 9 months ago, and it was in the Indian Express, published out of Delhi, and it said, Prime Minister calls government secretaries to discuss the future of the economy. And then you read it and you discovered that the Prime Minister had realized that over the previous 1.5 years, the economy hadn't quite done as well as he expected. His government hadn't received the kind of approbation that he felt it deserved. And he turned around to search for ideas as to how it could grow, how it could sort of completely transform the Indian economy. And the people whom he turned to for these ideas were the 15 or 16 people who were already running the Indian economy, namely the secretaries of every ministry. Now, I don't know if you've met the secretary of an Indian ministry, but these are extraordinary intelligent people who, at the age of 24, passed an examination, and since then have in their mind every morning been replaying that sort of moment of glory. They're not quite prepared for the modern world. And, you know, if you think of them as sort of, you know, Georgian gentlemen of leisure, that's one way that you could possibly understand them. You can think of them as sort of, you know, Tang Dynasty mandarins, and that's another way to understand them. They're really that kind of person. They're not quite up to running the sort of complicated economy that India is today. And definitely, if you're a political leader, you should not be turning to them for new ideas. All right. The first rule of brainstorming surely is look outside, you know, the box of bad ideas. And in this case, the box of bad ideas being the Indian civil service. The second was another meeting of Mr. Modi and civil servants, the second headline that should concern you. And in case you're wondering, are all the stories going to be about Mr. Modi meeting with the civil servants? Tragically, that's a large part of what's been happening in this country. But in that meeting, he gave every minister in charge of an infrastructure or an economic ministry. And remember, we have many, many more ministries than you have in Britain. So, you know, you can have a Ministry of Steel, a Ministry of Electronics, a Ministry of Small and Medium Industries, etc. And he said, look at your sector and tell me which are the 5 things that are most imported and how can we substitute away from imports. Now, that is exactly the wrong instruction to give to people who last thought about economics when they were doing honors in it in 1978 and we were a socialist country. All right. At every point, the instructions that Mr. Modi has been handing out over the past 2 years have been to take India back in many ways to an India that we have forgotten. You cap airfares. All right. You introduce price control across a series of sectors that had actually seen liberalization. You started introducing tariffs that are meant to create a domestic electronics industry, which will frankly not work. All right. You go to the World Trade Organization and try and scupper a deal because you wish to protect the vast and very inefficient price subsidies and production subsidies you give your farmers instead of moving to a more modern income subsidy system. At each point, in fact, when push comes to shove, Mr. Modi's instinct has not been to liberalize and deregulate the economy. And that is bad news. And I want to end by telling you exactly why it's bad news. Because as James just said, you know, an incremental change in the rate of growth makes a big difference to how soon we can become a middle-income country. But more than that, we have a very, very terrifying demographic bulge that we're going through right now. And I'll just give you a couple of the numbers so you think about them. We need to create jobs for 1 million young people a month. Not a year, a month entering the workforce. Currently, we do about, if that, a quarter of that rate. All right? And how many unemployed young people do we already have? Well, and this number is a little out of date, but it's extremely reliable because it's from the 2011 census, which actually went out and asked people this question. Between the ages of 15 and 30, we have 47 million young people looking for jobs. 47 million. And to that army of unemployed, we are adding at the rate of 1 million a month. So, we don't really have that much time. All right, we are in the middle of the greatest demographic bulge in human history. And these are people who need to be given real jobs. And Mr. Modi's approach, I'm afraid, is so far not quite cutting it. Thank you.